And welcome on in to Dynasty Never Rest, a podcast focused on fantasy football, trades, and awesome guest stars. This is the sixth episode, and I am excited to introduce my next incredible guest, Fantasy Ladder, aka Steve. He is the auction king, and he has become one of my closest friends in the space. So, Steve, it's just really good to have you here.
Yeah, this is really great. I'm really excited for you to take this step in this journey you're on in the fantasy football space, and really just a pleasure to be on with you.
Yeah, I wanted to wear this shirt tonight because Dynasty Pros is kind of how we got connected. We both joined the team as writers, I think at a similar time. Just a lot of us were brought on, me, you, Charlie, Darren, Ralph. I think we all kind of came in at the same time. And yeah, all of us guys have just kind of connected, and we're kind of just a click in a sense to where we kind of rely on each one another. We don't necessarily interact every day, but we're good at retweeting each other's posts and just being there in that sense.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we are going to talk a little Eagles here because obviously, as all of you can see, that Fantasy Ladder is an Eagles fan. And while I'm not an Eagles fan, I am a Jalen Hurts fan. Always been that way. And so I always like talking about the Eagles just because of Hurts. And so why don't we just get into talking about the Eagles? So who have the Eagles signed that you like thus far?
So for starters, I was really glad that they were able to re-sign two older veterans that have been on the team for a while, in Fletcher Cox and Jason Kelce. So Jason Kelce is like my favorite player in the league. He's just off the field. He is just a ton of fun and just really outrageous, but it's just awesome. And then as a player, he is like a Pro Bowl, all pro caliber center. And, so just he's been kind of flirting with the idea of retiring for a couple seasons now, but it's just always great to have that kind of a guy around. Now, outside of the veterans, the one free agent they were able to bring in, which I think is just a fantastic fit for the team and for the player itself, is Hassan Reddick. He is a local guy from Camden. He went to Temple. Camden's in New Jersey, right across the river from Philadelphia. But either way, they really got a fantastic deal with him. He signed for 3 years, $45 million, with $30 million guaranteed. So I read that when you break down the $15 million per year, that ranks as tied at 17th in the he's 17th as a pass rusher making that kind of money. Okay.
And he's more than a top 17 pass rusher in this league.
Exactly. So in the last 2 seasons, 23 and a half sacks, that puts him fifth most in the NFL over that span. So to me, that's just that's just a phenomenal bargain. And he's still in his prime. You know what I mean? He's not just like an older vet, like a Justin Houston or whatever, who's still good in his own right. But very, very happy with that signing for sure.
Yeah, me and some of the guys at Dynasty Pros, we just did an IDP draft.
Oh, nice.
Just this past week, and I got Reddick, I think, in the 21st round. And he just kept falling. And I was like, I can't just let him sit there anymore. And after I drafted him, I said, yeah, in the 21st round, I'll take the guy who has the 5th most sacks over the past 2 seasons, because it's like a huge sack bonus league. And so
perfect.
Was definitely, and like Myles Garrett and Watt, they went in the single digit rounds. And so to get Reddick there, yeah. Reddick's a guy that I've been saying throughout free agency that he has been one of the best bargain buys. His contract isn't he's not getting paid enough, but I think he may have taken a kind of hometown discount to where he
Yeah,
wanted to be
definitely.
with the Eagles. And yeah, so that's exciting. I do want to ask you, what do you think about the extension of Jordan Malata, the offensive line guy? I don't know a ton about him, but I saw a couple months ago they extended him, and it seemed like a decent contract, but I don't know enough about the Eagles to know if he's a weekly starter, if he's so. What are your thoughts on that signing or extension?
Yeah, he's a really fascinating player because he was either a seventh round pick or went undrafted because he was like an Australian or like a former
Yeah,
rugby player. Um, so at that, draft capital, it's like, well, you take the gamble on the guy, and if he works out, that's cool. If he doesn't, he doesn't. It's not the end of the world. But he was a very solid starter, and the tackle position was one where the Eagles have had a lot of like just bad um, luck as far as the injuries are concerned. They had longtime veteran. Oh gosh, Jason Peters, and he just got injured like year after year after year. It was a shame to see it happen. And then they drafted Andre Dillard in the first round, I think 3 years ago, and he for whatever reason just is having trouble with injuries too. So like the offensive line has just always been like Brandon Brooks, another like guard who like
right.
his
Who's
really great player just out. So Malata had to be put in just out of like necessity. And then he became like a really solid piece of that offensive line, obviously as a left tackle. And yeah, so I'm to be honest, I'm not sure what his contract was either. But just to keep that kind of a player around, I think is exciting, and don't ask me about the cap. I have no idea how that works. It seems very fickle to me, but
I don't think any of us really have a good understanding of it.
right.
Is there anybody out in free agency that you would like to see the Eagles grab? I have one guy that I would like the Eagles to grab, but I want to see if you've got somebody.
So I had two players at this point at the top of my list.
Uh-huh.
I sadly crossed off Bobby Wagner's name after he signed with the Rams because he would have
Yeah.
been just an amazing fit at middle linebacker to replace Alex Singleton.
Uh-huh.
Either way, that didn't happen. But who I'm looking at this point are um, Tyrann Mathieu and Jarvis Landry, actually,
Yeah.
because the problem with Landry at this point has been just the amount of money he's asking for. And again,
Uh-huh.
just back to the cap, like I don't know how that honestly, I just don't know how that's going to work with what
Right.
we have and what he's asking for. But I think he would be an excellent piece for the offense
Hmm.
to I mean, he's extremely versatile, uh, really great in the slot, and he does he does everything you'd want him to, and I think he could
Right.
just help um, Jalen Hurts as far as his accuracy is concerned, but still open things up for Devonta Smith. But either way, so Jarvis Landry, if we're going for offense, that's who I would be looking at, and then Tyrann Mathieu, where we're always are looking for help in the secondary because the Eagles just don't prioritize that in the draft a lot of the time. And Mathieu had a virtual meeting with the Eagles today. So there might be some promise there, but I think he's just taking his sweet time and just seeing who the highest bidder can be, kind of between the Saints and the Eagles, which is ironic because they just had that big trade go down.
Uh-huh.
But to answer the question, looking at the Honey Badger and Jarvis Landry for sure.
Yeah, Jarvis is definitely the offensive guy that I would love to land there.
Oh,
Just
nice.
because he really, I think he would fit the scheme well, and he would be a short area target guy, have the ability to be that guy across the middle of the field that Hurts didn't have last year.
That's
And
right.
I believe for him to continue to grow, somebody a guy across the middle of the field, the short area target, is going to be something that they need. And Jalen Rager is obviously not it. um, it I'm sure it stings as an Eagles fan to have taken Jalen Rager over Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, it's just a tale as old as time. So, like, just going back years, like the
Even
draft
JJ.
with, but like years and years ago, like the draft with like Reggie Wayne and Steve Smith, they took Freddie Mitchell over both of them, I believe it was, and it's just like then JJ Arcega-Whiteside over Metcalf and all this.
Uh-huh.
So with Rager, I did a pretty impressive job of like tricking myself into being excited for him because hey, he is versatile. He can do a lot of things, but the production wasn't quite there at his time at TCU. I'll be can blame the quarterback play and then everything else. So yeah, it just was like just devastated to have that play out. But it is just remarkable just how poor of a performer he has been
Oh,
with a
absolutely.
substantial amount of playing time. He's on the field. He's just not doing anything. It's really
Yeah.
kind of remarkable, as Darren pointed out in his hilarious thread
Yes.
yesterday.
Yeah. It's been pretty embarrassing for Tim. He's not been that first round talent. So my question here is, let's say the Eagles don't pick up a wide receiver in free agency. Do you want Howie to draft one? Because the history of them drafting wide receivers, besides Smith,
Right.
Has not been great. But the good news is that Smith had a fantastic rookie year. Not big on touchdowns, but we kind of expected that with his size profile. But he had 900 yards or something close to that.
I think he was shy of 1,000. I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, but no, I think it was. I was happy with it. You know what I mean? Like he didn't like boom the way that Waddle and like Chase did. You know what I mean?
Right.
But yeah, it was kind of an interesting season. A lot of changing of the guard with Sirianni coming in and things like this. But and it took Sirianni a while to kind of get a grip on the offense. Like it took
Right.
several weeks for them to really find their groove and find out what their strengths and weaknesses were. But
Yeah, and kind of find out what Jalen Hurts was.
right.
He had started 4 or 5 games in the previous season, but they didn't
That's right.
really have a good grasp of what he did well, and so I think he started to figure that out towards the end of the season.
I think so too. But to answer your question, I am hoping that we get a wide receiver there in the first round because for me, this isn't a class where it's like I really want one guy over the other. I will be just as happy with like Treylon Burks, Olave, or Garrett Wilson, Drake London, whoever may be there at 15 or 18. I think that would be really great. I don't, so of those four, at least for me at this point, I don't necessarily have a strong preference over. I mean, and they're all different kind of players, right? So
Uh-huh.
like Drake London is like your bigger bodied kind of like contested catch type of guy.
Right.
I mean, he can do other things too, but I don't know. So and again, if it's like one of those four or another one that I'm missing out on, it would not surprise me if he takes a guy that should have been drafted in the second round or
Yeah.
something,
Like
But
if he pulls David Bell in the first round or
yeah, that wouldn't be great.
yeah.
And well, it's interesting because they have 5 picks inside of the first 101. So 15, 18, 51, 83. So there could be something decent there at 51, but I definitely would want to prioritize wide receiver at either 15 or 18 for
Yeah.
sure,
Yeah.
despite the bad history.
Well, and the Eagles don't have much of a history of going defensive in the draft. As the trends that I've seen, and so I think there's a good likelihood that they go at least a wide receiver with one of those two picks, because it's really their biggest need on the offense is to get a second guy in that offense. When you put a second guy like London or Burks in there with Smith and with Goddard, that would be a nice three-headed monster. And if you can get a guy like Jarvis in there as the third wide receiver,
That's perfect.
I think Jalen Hurts' passing efficiency would go up significantly, and so
because I think if a defense has to account for Smith, say Landry, Goddard, that would create a more ideal opportunity for someone like a Burks or a London to catch it like a deeper pass. What I do want to see out of Hurts is just an improved accuracy on his deep passes. That's been like a little inconsistent to put it lightly, but I think some of it is in what he was able to do, but also just who he was throwing to as well. It does make a difference, for sure.
Right. Throwing to Greg Ward and
Quez Watkins, who did okay in his own right, but it's like, come on, like you don't need to pay as much attention to that kind of a player than you know what I mean. So just
right. Quez Watkins would not be like a top 15 wide receiver in this draft, and so
that's right.
So
yeah,
hoping that Hurts gets some more weapons and Sirianni just continues to develop that offense.
Yeah, so definitely wide receiver. I would be eyeing at either 15 or 18. And then at the opposite, either 15 or 18. The one player who I am really hoping the Eagles look at is Nakobe Dean out of Georgia. That would, since we missed out on Bobby Wagner, I just think he would be just a phenomenal day one impact kind of a linebacker for the team. And again, the loss of Alex Singleton is pretty rough for the Eagles defense. I mean, good job on the Broncos for being able to scoop him up on a pretty cheap deal. But I think Singleton led the Eagles in tackles the last 2 seasons, so he's all over the place. And so I would love Nakobe Dean to be an Eagle on night one for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be I think that linebacker and wide receiver are two of their biggest holes right now. And so if they could pull both of those positions in the first round and then maybe continue to shore up that offensive line in the second round, get a guy to sit behind Kelsey, or I don't know. We'll just kind of have to see how he plays it. One final Eagles question.
Okay.
What did you think of the trade?
I basically just like threw my hands up in the air like when it came through, because all along it's just kind of known that Howie is a pretty aggressive like mover in the draft. They did it last year because they did that trade with Miami. Then they did it again on draft night to jump ahead of the Giants to get, or ahead of Dallas to get Devonta Smith, and then Dallas picked, and then the Giants picked that. Or then the Giants traded back with Chicago. I think it was. Yeah. But anyway, so I was really thrilled about that. I did not think for a second that Howie was going to make 3 picks on night one. He was either going to trade back in some fashion and then to load up on next year's class, which I'm very excited about. I think just gives them, well, because we get the first rounder, I think it gives them like that. It puts them in a really good spot to further monitor Hurts for this year, and then add to it next year, or maybe go a different direction and target one of the quarterbacks if the Saints are pretty bad, which it looks like they could be. Because I think realistically, the Saints are playing for like that last wild card spot. Yeah. I think the NFC South is still going through Tampa Bay, right? So I think their only shot at a playoff spot, which would be like poor draft capital, would be if they get like a wild card spot in the playoffs. So I was thrilled with it.
The Eagles are a better team than the Saints right now.
Right.
And so, it was pretty peculiar. I am hoping that it really works out for them, but part of me thinks that um, that this could be the last year of Hurts as an Eagle if he doesn't turn into Lamar Jackson or Kyler Murray or whoever it is, because they could end up with like a top 10 pick and draft a much better QB class for next year and
Right.
and and sit with a rookie that it was a more touted prospect. And so yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that that's extremely fair. I think the fact that Hertz made the playoffs in his second season is really encouraging, but now it's like you got to keep progressing in your ability and again I think it will just have to come down to that deep ball passing because that just really makes it just opens up the offense if you're able to have that just does volumes for what you're able to do.
Absolutely.
Um and if he shows that, I think they're in a good position either way where they can just kind of roll with them, or look at different directions. So I love the move. I was ecstatic when that alert came through. I like nearly jumped out of my seat. It was awesome.
Yeah. All right. So, as I mentioned before, you are the king of auction, or at least to me. Um, and so I'm giving you that crown, and we're going to talk a little auction here. How does that sound?
That sounds awesome.
So I have never done a dynasty auction draft before. I have done two redraft auctions, and they're a lot of fun. Auctions are a lot of fun, but they're also so frustrating because these players are on timers. And so, it's like you get down to the end of the timer and it's like 5, 4, 3, 2, and then somebody puts in a bid and the timer restarts. And so that's frustrating in redraft. So I can't imagine like if it's like a 12-hour timer, if you're doing a slow draft in Dynasty, how frustrating that could be.
Yeah, and what's funny is I actually have never done a dynasty auction draft either. But
Oh,
I think just in my experience, whatever draft type that you're entering into, that's how you want to approach your strategy and ultimately your budget percent allotment. Um, so with comparing dynasty to redraft, obviously redraft you're just that season, that's what you're aiming for. But then
uh-huh.
dynasty, you might just want to prioritize how you spend your money with however you want to build your team. But you're right that they are a ton of fun, very frustrating. And I've heard about these like slow dynasty auction drafts, and honestly, they sound like a nightmare. And that's just coming from someone who really loves auctions. It just sounds like the kind of stress I don't want to have in my life because it's just like kind of like with the redraft one, it's very intense for those 2 or 3 hours, however long it takes, and then it's done.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if it's going on day after day after day, it's like I've been in some like I've been in some like eBay situations where I just like tapped out after a while. Like, that they can have the stupid thing, you know what I mean? But with a dynasty league, that I don't know. I just feel like that would not be good for my well being or my mental health and all that jazz. But yeah. So I would like to do one. I haven't done one yet. Definitely more of a redraft auction uh preference, but I'm not like opposed to it. I just haven't done it either. It's just funny. Like I saw the question, I'm like, oh, like I haven't done that either. But yeah,
Yeah, and it kind of reminds me. I mean, I haven't done it, but it seems to remind me of the scene in Doctor Strange where he shows up and says to, I think it's Dormammu, "I've come to destroy you," and then it's a time loop, and it just keeps repeating and repeating and repeating and repeating. And it does it
right.
like 12, 14 times in the movie, and it's just like that's what every player is going to be like. And so it's definitely daunting, but I am intrigued by it because I also think I'd get a lot of enjoyment
Yeah.
from being that guy after 11 hours to put in a bid right before the timer's up, because you're like, oh, I think I finally got him this time, and then somebody comes in, and so um, so maybe we'll have to do one together and go experience the pain and joy together.
Absolutely, yeah.
Uh, uh, so what are some common misconceptions when it comes to auction?
I think a common misconception is that people just don't even know like where to begin on how to like prep for one.
Uh huh.
And to a certain degree, it's just like practice, like just practice makes perfect. It's just like with like a snake draft. You know what I mean? Um, you kind of have to get your feet wet before you really feel confident doing it one way or the other. So I think that seems to be everyone's hang up. It's like, well, I've never done one before. I don't I would just be completely overwhelmed. I don't know what I'm doing. And to a certain degree, I was like that once too. And
Uh huh.
then that's why mock drafts are available. You can just keep chipping away and try new things out. So I think that's kind of a misconception, and the unknowns, is really just what deters people. Like there's just a lot of safety and understanding. Okay, like the typical way people talk about fantasy football is by round value, not by percentage of your budget or a number of your budget. Like it's like another language. So
Uh
I
huh.
just think, yeah, and again, I have, 10 plus years of experience doing auction drafting. So it was a little bit to get used to, but very quickly you'll realize that you just have so much more control of your own destiny. And in a lot of ways, it's just so much more empowering to try to get the players that you are seeking out to get. You're not just relying on, well, I hope this guy passes on this, because it's all on you to a
Right.
certain degree. Obviously, you don't have an infinite amount of money to spend for your roster, but really, you have a much better way of making your team what you want it to be without relying on other people reaching or sniping you, things like that. It just doesn't happen. But the best way to sort of ease those blows is just to create like tiers. You want to get like abilitied players in tiers, and then that way, if you miss out on the one that you really really wanted, well, there's another one that's very similar at maybe a lower price point or a similar price point, so you can still fall back on that. And we all have these obsessions over certain players, and this is just a draft where you can really get your guy uh much more reasonably than like in a snake where it's just by chance. You might have to reach 2 rounds to get your guy. And this way you can just pay up for them, but you're still going to have to spend the same amount of money as everyone else.
Yeah, it gives everyone the opportunity to get every single player in the draft. If you're at the 12 spot, Jonathan Taylor is never going to be available to you. No matter
That's right.
what format, no matter what league, you don't even have a chance. And so auction just creates that chance to, if you want Jonathan Taylor, you can go get Jonathan Taylor. And so it's nice to have access to each and every player. And sometimes those guys like Jonathan Taylor, like we were in a $200 auction, redraft auction last year, and Jonathan Taylor went for $96. And I was like, yeah, I don't think I'm gonna be having any Jonathan Taylor shares, and so I ended up getting Najee for like 44 or something like that. It
That's
was
reasonable. Yeah.
yeah, for half the price. I got, I mean, 80% of what Jonathan Taylor does. Um, so yeah, it's nice to definitely have access to each and every player, because I do love Jonathan Taylor, but not that much.
But it is just like very devastating when you just get your draft pick and then it's like, well, I know these guys aren't going to get to me. Like
Uh-huh.
it just like stinks, you know. So this way, you just have the like you said, you have the ability to get any player you want. Just you have to potentially pay up for them, and then just having that discipline of being able to stop the bidding and just now, you know, that's a little too out of my that's out of my budget, you know,
Yeah.
just like anything, groceries, you know, whatever. Uh, clothing, you know, it's like I don't need to get the $500 pair of sunglasses. I can get the $5 pair at Ross because I'm just gonna lose them at the beach anyway. You know, maybe I'm talking from
Exactly.
experience. I don't know, but yeah. So it's just one of those things. It's and again, you just have so much more freedom in playing around with strategies too, because it just falls on what you are doing, not reacting to what other people are doing to a certain degree.
So one of my biggest um, issues with auction drafts is there's no trades, and I I love. I mean, like within the draft,
Right.
there's no trades, and so that was the reason why I wouldn't do auction. I was like, I love trades too much. I love the opportunity to make trades, and that just isn't there in auction. But
Yeah,
since
it
I,
definitely it gets a little clunky. Like if you're doing one in person, I highly recommend one in person rather than on Sleeper or ESPN or wherever it may be. Just
right,
the experience is just it is just peak draft day experience. But our home league has been doing auction since 2011, and we have incorporated like little trades that can happen, but again, you just disrupt the whole flow of
uh-huh.
the bidding and the nominations. So everyone has to like, you know, understand like what's happening, you know. So that it doesn't happen often, but you're right. Like that really could deter that aspect of it. And in like a normal well, I guess in some platforms you can make trades in a snake. Like I know on Sleeper you can. I'm not sure if you can do that on ESPN though, or
I
like
don't.
Yahoo. I'm not sure if that is a thing.
Yeah, I mean every single one of my leagues except for Scott Fishbowl was on Sleeper this year.
Oh,
Um,
perfect. Okay, there you go.
so I just play exclusively on Sleeper, and it's really nice just to have basically one platform, and from my opinion, the best platform. Um, they just continue to add things that help the functionality, and
Yeah,
ESPN and
definitely.
ESPN and Yahoo have done the same thing for the last 10 years. And so, um, but we're not here to talk about Sleeper. um, so, how much or what is the position that you typically spend the most on? And you can vary, like maybe in Superflex you spend the most in QB. Maybe you don't do a whole lot of Superflex auction. So just kind of let me know what you're comfortable with, and um, yeah. So who do you spend kind of the most? What position is?
Yeah. So what I typically try to do is I try to prioritize scarcity as much as possible. Um, so in a Superflex auction, I would bump up my typical budget percentage for quarterbacks than I would if it's a single QB league, where I'm very much a proponent of just like late round QB, you know, and that kind of thing. I can be like that to a certain degree on tight end too, where I'd have more confidence getting a tight end earlier in a snake draft than I would in an auction. I just like how my teams look better. So, and there's no right or wrong. I just would rather upgrade at that position with a trade in the middle of the season, not prioritize that in the draft. Because you have the ability to create a team that could be vastly different than the rest of the league compared to a snake, where it all kind of makes, to a certain degree, everyone a little bit more equal at like in week one. Week one in an auction, there could be four teams that just look horrible, and then six that look really strong, and then a bunch in the middle that just are kind of could go either way. So in a super flex, I would prioritize Q. I would plan on prioritizing quarterback, and then you just kind of have to see how it goes. I did a Superflex auction mock last Sunday, and I ended up spending $31 out of 200 on three quarterbacks, which is kind of funky because like your typical top 10 are going for 30 plus.
Uh-huh.
So I was able to come away with Mac Jones, Tom Brady, and Deshaun Watson all for $10 or $11 there on Brady. I spent on, and that was not something that I was planning on doing, but it actually,
Uh-huh.
I was pretty happy with how that played out when you have guys like Lamar Jackson who alone are going for 33 in like a
Right.
super league, which I would typically would be willing to pay up for, but just for whatever reason, the way the draft was flowing, uh, it because like the nomination order can really make you adjust to
Right.
uh, how you want to approach it as well. So just a lot of things to juggle. But typically, I would want to spend most of my money on running back, especially like a top running back. One of the strategies I think I'm going to be using this season for auction leagues would be like hero RB, like
Uh-huh.
spend up for like a top six running back, and then try to get a bunch of like back end RB2s or high end RB3s, like a little cluster, like three or four of those, and then like just like one elite running back.
Uh-huh.
And then like wide receiver, I can kind of give or take at the top because they can just be so expensive compared to a lot of these guys in the middle. You
Right.
know, I'm very comfortable leaving an auction draft with like four wide receiver twos and threes rather than one wide receiver one and like six wide receiver fives. You know, like if you
Right.
however you classify your rankings, that's just how I like think about it.
Uh-huh.
So I think the depth of the wide receiver position, uh, the way I like to look at it is I'm never going to be the guy that's going to get Tyreek Hill in an auction or Devontae Adams or like Jamar Chase, I guess, this year. I'll either try to get him through trade, but I'm likely not going to come away with them just because there are, and again, not saying there's a lot of Jamar Chases out there, but just because the way I can fill out a roster, I feel much more confident having four or five who are like between wide receiver uh, 20 and 35 rather than just one near the top and then a bunch of guys in the 40s and beyond.
Uh-huh.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Kind of hitting on guys like uh Michael Gallup and Tyler Boyd and kind of guys around that range.
Right.
And last year, Cooper Kupp was in that range.
That's right.
And the year before that, who was it that was in the wide receiver? There's somebody in the wide receiver 30 range 2 years ago that exploded and was like a wide receiver one. I can't think of who it was off the top of my head though. But yeah.
But no, you're right though. Yeah, Cooper Kupp could have been had for like $10, $15 max if you're playing with like a bunch of Rams fans. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And now this year he'll be no less than 30. Well, in a super flex. So if it's like a one QB, he could easily be like a $40-$50 player, you know,
Yeah.
for sure.
I mean,
Um,
I think that he will get overbid this season. Um,
mhm. Yeah,
just because of the historic season he had. He's just I don't think he's gonna live up to what he's bid on this year. Just because typically that doesn't repeat. Just a guy performing at that high of a level.
yeah. No, I don't think it's like a ridiculous thing to say to just generally speaking, fade him. You know what I mean?
Right.
I do think it is plausible that he could have another season like what he had. The environment hasn't changed a ton in the Rams. You know, like they brought in Allen Robinson. Who knows if Beckham's coming back? Robert Woods is gone, so he'll still get like a really tasty, target share, and with Stafford and everything else, getting the extension. So it is kind of lining up nicely there. But you're right,
Uh-huh.
like having
But
that expectation is gonna be all the more devastating. You kind of just kind of be happy you got him if you got him last year, but
right, but like he broke several records last year, and so to have that as an expectation
oh no, I
is
think that's wrong. Yeah,
right,
yeah,
right,
for
and
sure.
so I still think he's going to be a wide receiver one this season. Like I don't have any question about that. I just think that people are going to be he may not finish as the wide receiver one this season, and I think that some people aren't when it comes to redraft season. Some people aren't even going to consider that that's a possibility just because of what he did. And I'm sure back in the day when Randy Moss did the same thing, that people
Yeah,
were like, "Oh, there's no way that he won't be the wide receiver one," and he wasn't.
there you
So,
go.
so spend a bunch on wide receivers. No.
Right? Yeah, no.
um, who do you typically nominate first? Or do
Who
you
do I
have a
typically nominate
nomination
first?
strategy? I know that question I didn't prepare you for, but
No, no,
like to
no.
throw a
That
couple at you.
this is very easy to answer. What I typically like to do are nominate players who I'm really only interested in drafting at a value. So everyone, I'm happy to draft for any price, right? So, like say last year, I would have nominated Joe Mixon out a lot last year because I just didn't think he was going to have the season he did, and
Uh-huh.
I got a lot of egg on my face on that one. But either way, I would have put him out because I would have been happy to get him at a discount, right? Especially early in the draft when people like maybe don't want to spend a lot of money. Um, so it's either players that I'm either out on or would be happy to get at a discount, and then I can just kind of shift, how I want to proceed with how the bids are coming out. So that's one I like to do. Another like mid auction uh, nomination strategy I have is nominate players at positions I'm already set at, right? So if I already have a pretty good stable of wide receivers, I'm going to just nominate the best available just to get as much money off the board as possible because it's just money that I'm not going to be spending and someone else needs to spend.
Uh-huh.
So why would I nominate a position that I could potentially get cheaper later that I do need when I know that money is going to be spent on a position I don't need. So
Uh-huh.
that's one that I like to do a lot. Um, so I try to have like a combination of that, but it is really important to have a strong idea of who you want to nominate beforehand. You don't want to do that on the fly, especially if you're doing it in a draft room because you have a timer on the nomination. Then it's just going to
Uh-huh.
put up who's ever at the top of your queue, and you might not necessarily want to do that,
Yeah.
um, in that moment. So, but that's a really great question. Um, there are just a lot of these what I call like micro strategies that occur in an auction. You just have to juggle a lot of different things: your budget, your
Uh-huh.
opponent's budget, what you have to fill in your roster, and what everyone else has to fill in their roster. Um, so knowing that you're set at tight end and like three other guys who have more money than you aren't, you could put a tight end out, just have them like battle it out like it's the Hunger Games over like
Right.
whoever, and then that they're going to overpay most likely because all three of them need that,
Uh-huh.
and it's just money off the board that you weren't going to need to spend anyway.
Hmm. So I do have a nomination story here.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
in my auction redraft 2 years ago, I did a couple mock drafts to kind of prepare, and in one of the mock drafts I did, Mike Thomas of the Bengals
Okay.
went up for nomination, and immediately $56, something like that, because it was
Ooh.
after his reception season.
Yeah.
And so in the mock draft, I saw that and I was like, okay, okay. And so I get into my actual draft, and my first nomination is Mike Thomas of the Bengals. Immediately $45 go on the board in the actual draft.
That's
And
amazing.
and um and some people were like, oh, he only went for $45. That's insane. And the guy who bid on him like 30 seconds later was like, oh my gosh, this is not Michael
Yeah.
Thomas.
Yeah, you felt
uh,
nauseous just instantly. Yeah.
I don't
Whole night's
like,
ruined right off the top.
yeah, it was a great moment, but I would be so upset if that, like, I had done something like that to me, because at the time, um, Duke Johnson and David Johnson were both on the Texans, and
Oh, wow.
so that was also one of them that happened, to where somebody nominated Duke, and somebody spent up for David, and yeah, so just those, and like DJ Moore and
And David Moore.
David
Yeah.
Moore, yeah,
Yep.
just those guys. So that's one of my fun auction stories. I don't have a ton of them, but that was just
No,
I
it's
did
funny if you throw out like the other Michael
right,
Thomas out and you only get him for $1, whatever, you just drop him,
right.
add someone else. You know what I mean? That's
Uh-huh.
funny. Like back in the day, there was like two like Adrian Petersons.
One on the
Uh,
Bears, one on the Vikings.
that's
Yeah,
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's so
yeah.
funny.
So I wouldn't consider it a nomination strategy, but it is pretty funny when it
Well,
doesn't
sneaky.
happen to
That's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you.
Yeah, they say auctions are chess when like redraft is checkers, and that's exactly it.
Right.
These little things you can do in that kind of a draft room that just can't be done
In
elsewhere.
Yeah, in a snake. Yeah, there's you can't, like, nobody's gonna make that mistake. But because there's just this quick time frame within the auction, people don't like double check. They don't go and look at the statistics. They're just like, oh, Michael Thomas is on the board, I'm gonna go bid for him. So yeah.
Which is actually a good other little tip here is really just only add $1 unless it's a player that you are supremely confident in that you're willing to put a little extra on the bid, right? So just when in doubt, just $1 more. Um,
So
rather than upping it like $7 or something. That's you don't always need to do that.
so you don't find value in, let's say, putting kind of a big bid on someone to kind of scare some people off? Like, if you start the bid a little higher, they're like, oh, if it's starting this high, I don't want to participate, you know?
In my experience, that is usually more useful like halfway through,
Okay.
not early on. So once people are already spending money, they now have to kind of hold their budget a little tighter in the middle. So say I have the most money to spend. I could throw out a semi aggressive early bid and everyone's oh no, screw that. There's like still like a dozen other guys I'd rather get out like a and then really it may be like a $2 or $3 discount, but they're just out already because they have to hold a little tighter to their money. So
Uh-huh.
I will say that that could be advantageous halfway through or towards the back end of the draft rather than on the front end.
Okay.
Um, because really what you don't want to do is price enforce, especially at a position that's not going to benefit your roster. Like if you only need to start 3 running backs, and I know a bunch of people who prescribe to the stars and scrubs kind of a way of going where they would aim for 3 of the top 10 like running backs, for example. Then
Uh-huh.
there's like boom, 3 studs. Then you fill in the rest. That's fine because I got 3 studs or whatever.
Uh-huh.
I just have always been more of like a draft for depth type, so you can just
Uh-huh.
have more flexibility in pulling trades. Or with COVID and all that crap, like
Uh-huh.
really complicated, like the injury, questionable out kind of stuff. So just kind of leaving the draft with more depth rather than like the stars and scrubs. So that's where I wouldn't want to be too ultra aggressive on the bidding on the big jumps in bidding early on. I would try to do that more in the middle or towards the end, depends how much money you have. But again, just a lot to juggle. But it's so much fun though.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
What is the biggest pitfall or trap when it comes to auction?
Yeah, I think sort of kind of like with the misconception thing, the amount of time and the preparation and the experience that people have, that can be a little bit of a turnoff because it is a higher level. I think it's a higher level thinking about going into your draft, where like a snake draft, you can literally make a pick, go to the bathroom. You can't just like leave the draft board in an auction because it's just constant. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
But I think a pitfall is like the time and the preparation, because you really just have to consider every single player, because every single player is literally available. If they get nominated, well, that's your opportunity to get them. So I think the pitfall might be just in how people perceive how much has to go into getting ready for it. But then again, that can be what's the word I'm looking for? That can be remedied just by your own experience with it.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Would you say it matters what amount you have in your budget, or do you play more of a percent game? So let's say you one redraft has a budget of 200, and then the next one has a budget of 1,500.
Right. This is an excellent question, and I've seen really wacky draft results when people don't know how to handle this. So I always defer to percentage, because that way that same percentage applies to $100, $200, 500, 1,500. It just doesn't matter as long as you have the percentage and you can get used to sort of doing the math, or even just like kind of do it on the fly in the draft room. So a typical set would be $200. So just a lot of platforms will just say, hey, on like their cheat sheets, this guy is for a $200 budget, we'd recommend $60, right? But like I know CBS, for example, their auction draft rooms are based on $100. At least it was, I don't know what it is now, but it used to be $100. So that was like a big distinction, where they would say, oh, that's just a $4 player. But if you heard the same talking point on like ESPN article or podcast, it would be double that, because it's double the budget.
Right.
So I defer to percent, because it carries over regardless of the total money spent per team. So an example of where it got wonky to my benefit last year was I did a vampire league. It was auction. So this was a $500 budget. Or sorry, it was a $500 budget per team. In that draft, I knew two people were experienced. Some people were just trying this out for the first time. It just was like a free league. It just was like just for fun, right? So $500 budget. And again, last year, I got Christian McCaffrey for $87. People were a little shy about spending early on, but in my head, I'm like, well, in a $200 budget, CMC is worth like 60, right?
Right.
So only 87 on more than double that budget. That's an extreme discount, and these people don't know it.
Right.
So I literally was able to get Christian McCaffrey for 17.5% of the budget, when normally he's worth like 30% of the budget.
Right.
So that was an extreme discount. But that one was also was very wonky, because people didn't know what they were doing. You saw some wild purchases in that one. Like the most expensive play, this was super flex. The most expensive player drafted was Kyle Pitts, and he went for $99. Like it just
Oh
was
my
crazy.
goodness.
So that's like a hard one to really say this is typical. But the fact remains that because I had like the experience of understanding like the budget of that, the percent that Christian McCaffrey, like a player like Christian McCaffrey is worth, I got him for like half that.
Uh-huh.
So that was like a home run, and then we all know what happened last year.
Yeah.
But either way, yeah, I ended up losing him to one of the vampires. It was devastating. It was
Oh
horrible.
man.
But anyway, yeah, it was really rough. But that was just an example of you just want to apply the percentage, and then that way you're just prepared regardless of what the total money spent is going to be across the whole draft. So that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I do my fab in terms of percentage, just because I have a couple leagues that I have a league that it's 1,000 fab. I have a league that 100. I have a
Oh,
league
right.
that is
Yep. Same
200.
principle. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I figured that that's kind of how you would would carry this out, and a similar philosophy, um, just because it really doesn't make that big of a difference. But when it's 1,000, you know, maybe it almost feels like you can spend more, but it's really not more. So it's just the, doing it in percentages seems absolutely like the best way to go. So you've got it all figured out, Auction King.
Yeah. Here it is. Yeah. No, that's funny.
All right. So I want to know where I can find your content, Steve.
Yeah, so I write articles for Dynasty Pros, FF, as well as for the IDP guys. For that website, I also started doing some video content as well. So on their YouTube channel, I've done a couple of rookie mock draft reviews, and as well as some Dynasty Dilemmas. That's been the series on Dynasty Pros. I've done a couple of those, got a couple more in the works coming out here. So just keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, awesome. I will have to go check out your IDP guys video content because I didn't know that you were doing video content for them. So I
Neither
will
did I until just a few weeks ago. I just
definitely.
figured, I'll give it a try and see how it works. So I've been enjoying it.
Well,
Yeah,
good. Yeah, yeah. I will definitely go and check that out. And
appreciate that.
uh, it's been awesome talking auction with you, Steve, and I just appreciate you coming on the show and talking football with me.
Absolutely.
All right.